Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to completely ruin your next vacation.
That is a very aggressive opening.
I'm serious, though. You know that feeling, right? When you go to visit a castle,
Mm-hmm.
you're standing there, maybe somewhere in the English countryside or up in Wales, Scotland, and you're looking at these incredible, jagged, crumbled walls.
Right. There's moss on the stones, bits of the sky showing through these huge gaps.
Exactly. It's the classic romantic image of ruin, and you stand there and you think, wow, the ravages of time.
Or, maybe you imagine a big battle,
Yeah.
a siege.
Yeah, you imagine a catapult just smashing into that wall or armies storming the gates with battering rams. You think, the chaos of battle is what left this pile of rocks here.
And that is precisely the story, the narrative that we are going to take apart today because, well, yes, time and sieges definitely played their part.
Sure.
The reality for hundreds, literally hundreds of castles across Britain is much colder, it's much more calculated, and frankly, it's a lot more interesting.
Because what if that destruction wasn't an accident? What if it wasn't just the slow work of time and it wasn't even the heat of battle? What if that ruin was created by a team of bureaucrats
In engineers and laborers.
working calmly, methodically, and deliberately taking that entire building apart piece by piece?
That is the absolute core of what we're talking about today. We're looking at a medieval phenomenon called slighting.
Slighting. It sounds like an insult. Like, oh, he slighted me at court.
Well, you're not far off. It is an insult. Just on this massive architectural scale.
Okay, so what is it technically?
Slighting is the deliberate destruction of a high-status fortification. And often, it wasn't just the stone walls. It could be its contents, the entire landscape around it, and it was always done during a time of conflict. But the key word, the most important word there, is deliberate.
So we're talking about the art of unmaking a castle.
Unmaking it and doing it specifically to degrade its value, not just its military value, so you can't, fight from it anymore, but its social value, its administrative value, its entire symbolic meaning. And to do this, we're diving into a really massive piece of research. It's a PhD thesis by Richard Neville from the University of Exeter called The Archaeology of Castle Slighting in the Middle Ages.
And this isn't just like a quick look. This thesis analyzed 60 different sites
60 sites.
across England, Wales, and Scotland. And it covers the period from the Norman conquest in 1066 all the way up to 1500. So we have some serious data to work with here.
We really do. And our mission today is to completely overturn that Hollywood narrative. We all love the image of the fireball from the trebuchet hitting the tower and exploding.
Oh, yeah.
But the reality of how these castles died is often much more complex. We need to stop looking at ruins and just seeing damage and start seeing them as projects, deliberate demolition projects.
I love that idea. The immovable object, the great stone castle, being taken apart by the very same kind of people who built it, or, their neighbors.
It creates this entirely new field of study. You could almost call it, destructionology.
Destructionology. I like that. It sounds like a heavy metal album.
It does, doesn't it? But it's actually archaeology. It's the archaeology of destruction. And to really get our heads around it, we have to start by defining what we actually mean. Because slighting is, it's a bit of a slippery term.
Right. I did look it up. The Oxford English Dictionary says something like the action of leveling ground, or razing or demolishing. But it also marks those definitions as obsolete.
Which is pretty fitting, I guess, since we're talking about medieval history. But in the context of, castle studies, the definition has to be a lot broader. Because if you just say leveling to the ground, well, you miss about half the story.
Because they didn't always completely flatten them, did they?
Very rarely. Total destruction requires an immense amount of labor. We can get into the physics of that later. But more often, slighting existed on a spectrum.
A spectrum of destruction.
Exactly. On one end, yes, you've got throwing to the ground, total erasure from the landscape. But on the other end, you have just token damage.
Like what?
Maybe you just knock off the battlements, the crenellations at the top. Or maybe you just take down the main gatehouse. It's still a castle, but it's wounded.
So it's not just about making it impossible to defend.
See, that's the traditional military view. We must destroy this fortress so the enemy can't use it against us. And that's true sometimes. It's definitely a factor.
But it's not the whole picture.
Not at all. If that were the only reason, why would you bother draining the ornamental lake? Why would you go to the trouble of burning down the pleasure garden? That has no military value.
Okay. So it's about removing value in a broader sense.
Precisely. And value in the Middle Ages wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. Castles were the ultimate symbols of lordship. They were the physical manifestation of a noble's power, their right to rule, their control over the land and its people.
So if I'm a king and you're a rebellious baron and I come in and smash your castle, I'm not just breaking your house.
You're breaking his status.
I'm attacking your brand, not just your bunker.
You are breaking their entire image. There's some really fascinating work by a historian named Patricia Skinner on medieval disfigurement that, believe it or not, connects directly to this. She writes about the body analogy.
The body analogy.
Yeah.
How does a pile of stones relate to a human body?
Okay, think about a medieval nobleman. His physical appearance, his ability to fight, his very presence, that's his power, right?
Mm-hmm.
If he gets a big scar on his face in battle, it's not necessarily the cool badge of honor we might think of today. It can be a public mark of shame. It's a permanent, visible sign that he lost a fight, that he was vulnerable, that someone got the better of him.
And the castle is the body of the lordship.
Exactly. A slated castle is like a scarred face on the landscape. If you leave a castle standing, but you rip the front off the great tower, or you smash all the fancy stonework around the windows, you are leaving a permanent, jagged scar. Every time the local people walk past it, every time a visiting noble rides by, they don't see a defensive position, they see a monument to the owner's humiliation.
That is absolutely brutal. It's pure psychological warfare. It's a giant billboard that says, the guy who lived here challenged the king, and he lost. Don't you make the same mistake.
It is. It's about imposing chaos on order. I mean, think about it. Building a castle is the ultimate act of imposing order on the landscape. You're taking raw stone, wood, and earth, and you're forcing it into the shape that completely dominates the countryside. You're saying, I control nature, I control this land. Slighting is the act of reversing that, of returning that symbol of order to chaos.
I am taking your carefully constructed order, and I'm turning it back into a meaningless pile of rocks.
Correct. And this isn't, a new idea that popped up with the Normans. We can trace this thinking way, way back. There's something called the Edict of Pitras in 864 AD.
864. Wow, that is early. We're talking about the Carolingian Empire here.
We are. Charles the Bald. He ordered that any adulterine fortification.
Adulterine.
Adulterine castles. It means unauthorized castles, basically. Forts built without the king's express permission.
That's a great word for a castle. It sounds so scandalous.
Yeah.
Like an illegitimate child, but made of stone.
In a way, it is. It's an illegitimate claim to power. It's a challenge to the legitimacy of the king. If you can build a castle without permission, you're challenging the king's monopoly on violence and power. So the punishment had to be total destruction.
And we see this really ramp up during periods of civil war, right? Like the anarchy in the 12th century.
Oh, the anarchy was just... It was rife with slighting, a perfect storm. You had rival claimants to the throne, Stephen and Matilda. You had barons switching sides constantly, building these castles everywhere to protect their own lands.
So it was a mess.
A total mess. And whenever one side would gain the upper hand in a region, the first thing they'd do is go around slighting the castles of the lords who had backed the other guy. It was a way of, resetting the board, stamping their authority on the map.
Now, there's a big exception to this rule of the conqueror destroys the loser's home, isn't there? A very famous Scot.
Robert the Bruce, yes. In the early 1300s, during the Scottish Wars of Independence, he took a completely different approach. He destroyed his own castles.
The scorched earth policy.
The ultimate scorched earth policy. He knew that the English army was, frankly, better equipped for long sieges. Their whole strategy was to take Scottish castles and garrison them to control the territory.
So Robert the Bruce's logic was no castles, no English garrisons.
Exactly. He realized that if there were no castles for them to hold, the English army couldn't stay in Scotland over the winter. They couldn't control the land. So as soon as he recaptured a castle, sometimes his own family's ancestral homes, he would slight them. He would tear them down so they were useless to the English.
That takes some serious commitment. I'm going to burn down my own ancestral home just so you can't sleep in it.
It's an incredible strategic decision. But that is the minority case. That's using slighting as a proactive military strategy. Usually, slighting is about punishment. It's about social control being imposed on you by a superior power.
Okay, so we've established the why. It's punishment, it's symbolism, it's about scarring the face of your enemy. But what I really want to get into is the how. Because we're talking about the Middle Ages. They don't have dynamite. They don't have bulldozers. And yet we know for a fact they brought down these massive stone structures.
This is where we get into the real detective work. The thesis actually calls it the CSI of the Middle Ages.
Castle scene investigation.
I wish I had thought of that, but yes. The fundamental question for the archaeologist is, how do you distinguish between a wall that just fell down over 500 years because it was old and neglected, and a wall that was deliberately pushed over on a Tuesday in 1173?
Because, yeah, if I'm walking through a ruin today, it all just looks like a pile of rocks to me.
It does to the untrained eye. But to an archaeologist, that pile of rocks, that soil, it tells a story. The biggest problem they face, though, is what's called the missing witness.
The missing witness, what's
We
that?
rarely have written records of the specific damage. We might have a pipe roll entry or a letter from a king saying, "Go forth and destroy this castle." But we don't have a report from the foreman on the ground saying, "Okay, on Monday we pulled down the north wall, and on Tuesday we set fire to the Great Hall."
So we have the order, but we don't have the receipt.
We don't have the itemized bill of destruction, exactly. So we have to learn to read the stones in the soil themselves. And there are what the thesis calls archaeological fingerprints of slighting.
Okay, let's walk through the crime scene. Fingerprint number 1.
Rubble in the ditch.
That sounds simple enough. Walls fall down. They fall into the ditch or the moat that surrounds the castle.
But it's how they fall that's the key. Think about a wall decaying naturally over centuries. It happens slowly, right? A stone falls out, then some dirt and leaves wash down on top of it, then a bit of mortar crumbles, then another stone falls. You get these distinct layers. Archaeologists call it stratigraphy.
Right. It's like a lasagna of decay.
A lasagna of decay, that is the perfect analogy. Soil, stone, organic matter, soil, stone. But if a castle is slighted, if a whole section of wall is pushed over all at once,
You don't get lasagna.
you get a dump. You get a massive, single, thick layer of unsorted stones, chunks of mortar all jumbled together, sitting right at the bottom of the ditch. It's an archaeological signature of a single, violent event.
So it's that sudden event frozen in time in the soil.
Frozen in the soil. There's a brilliant example from Leicester Castle. In 1173, Henry II ordered it destroyed after a rebellion. And when archaeologists excavated the ditch, they found this one distinct, thick layer of stones and building material right at the bottom. It corresponds perfectly to that historical order. It wasn't a slow decline. It was a demolition.
Okay, fingerprint number 2. This one sounds like it's out of a heist movie. The missing ashlar.
Ah, yes. The ashlar.
For those of us who don't know our masonry terms, what exactly is ashlar?
Ashlar is the good stuff. It's the fine, smooth, perfectly square-cut facing stone. It's the expensive, high-quality stone that you put on the outside of the wall to make it look impressive and strong. The inside of the wall, the core, is usually just rough rubble and mortar, but the ashlar is the pretty expensive skin.
That's valuable.
Extremely valuable. It requires skilled masons to cut it, a lot of effort to transport it. So here's the clue. If you're an archaeologist and you dig into that big rubble dump in the ditch and it's full of the rough core stones, the ugly stuff, but there's no ashlar, what does that tell you?
It tells me someone took the good stuff first.
Exactly. It suggests the valuable stone was stripped off the walls, or robbed out, as it's called, before the demolition. Or maybe it was carefully removed for reuse in another building. It implies a calculated, methodical, almost business-like process. We're going to take this apart, and we're going to sell the parts for profit.
But what if the ashlar is in the ditch?
Then you know it was a rage demolition. If you find those beautiful, expensive, perfectly cut ashlar blocks smashed and thrown into the ditch, along with all the worthless rubble, it suggests a hurried, violent destruction. Nobody was thinking about profit. They just wanted that wall down now. It was an act of anger, not accounting.
That's fascinating. So the presence or absence of a particular type of stone tells you the mindset of the destroyers. Were they bureaucrats making a profit, or were they soldiers making a point?
Precisely. And then you have fingerprint number 3, mortar spreads.
Mortar spreads? What's that?
It's pretty much what it sounds like. Layers or patches of mortar found on the ground during an excavation. This can tell you a couple things. It might show you where stones were being cleaned off for reuse.
Oh, it's cool.
Imagine a little work site. You've just pulled down a section of wall. You want to reuse the stones. You'd have a laborer sitting there with a hammer chipping all the old mortar off the blocks. That would leave a little pile, spread of mortar dust and chips. If we find that, we see the ghost of that workman.
Or it could show something more violent.
Right. If you find a spread of mortar that's mixed in with smashed fragments of stone, it's evidence of percussive destruction. Someone stood right there, hammering and picking that wall apart on the spot.
And then the last fingerprint, which I think is the most dramatic one, is the earthworks.
This is where we see actual landscape surgery. You have to remember, castles aren't just stone, they're earth. The big mound that the keep sits on is usually round. It's a nice, neat, conical hill.
Right.
But at Groby Castle, the motte is kidney-shaped.
Kidney-shaped. Like a bean.
Exactly like a bean. Now, that doesn't happen naturally. Erosion doesn't turn a perfect circle into a kidney. It smooths things out.
So someone dug a huge chunk out of it.
Yes. The weird shape is almost certainly the result of workmen deliberately digging into the side of the mound to destabilize it, or maybe to destroy the path or stairway leading up to the keep. They physically altered the geography of the hill as an act of destruction.
And there's an even more extreme example at Bedford Castle, right?
Yeah. Bedford is incredible. Excavations there showed that the motte was literally shaved down.
Shaved.
They lowered the overall height of the mound by about 4 meters. 4 meters. Can you imagine the effort involved in that? Moving tons and tons of earth with medieval shovels and baskets just to make the hill shorter?
That's unbelievable.
And they found the old stone revetment, the retaining wall that held the mound in place, buried deep under these demolition layers. But the most telling detail was the top of the mound. It was concave.
Hollowed out. Like a bowl.
Exactly like a bowl. Natural erosion tends to round things off, make them convex. To get a concave top, you have to physically dig it out. It's absolute proof of deliberate human intervention to unmake the very shape of the castle.
It's just so much work. I mean, I complain about having to weed my garden. The idea of shaving 4 meters off a hill with a medieval shovel is just mind-boggling.
And that leads us perfectly into the next part, the methods.
Yeah.
Because you are absolutely right. It is incredibly hard work. And the thesis makes a huge point of this. Slighting is not an unskilled job.
Right.
It's not just a case of giving a bunch of angry peasants some hammers and saying, go nuts.
No, you need professionals. You need engineers.
At Framlingham Castle, it was such a big, important job that King Henry II didn't just trust the local sheriff. He sent his own royal engineer, a man named Alnoth, to oversee the demolition.
Alnoth the destroyer.
Alnoth the engineer. But yes, in this case, a demolition engineer.
Yeah.
He was there to make sure the job was done properly, that the structural integrity of the castle was compromised effectively. You don't want to just chip the paint. You want to break the buildings back.
So what's in Alnoth's toolkit? If I'm a medieval engineer and I'm tasked with destroying a massive stone castle, what are my main options?
You've basically got 3 main methods. You have fire, you have digging and picking, and you have the most dangerous one, undermining.
Okay, let's start with fire, the classic. Seems straightforward.
Well, fire is great if you've got a timber castle, an old motte and bailey. Wood burns, problem solved.
But for a big stone castle.
For stone castles, it's more about gutting the interior. Stone castles still have huge amounts of wood inside them. Wooden floors, wooden roofs, wooden doors, all the internal partitions. If you can start a massive fire inside, you can burn all of that out. The stone shell might still be standing, but the castle is completely useless as a place to live or fight from.
And how do we see that in the archaeology? What are the clues?
Scorched stone is the big one. And specifically a kind of pink discoloration.
Pink?
Yeah, certain types of limestone and sandstone, when they're subjected to intense heat, they turn a sort of pink or reddish color. So if you see bands of pink stones in the walls, you know, there was a major fire there. You also find things like melted lead from the window casings or the roof, or thick deposits of charcoal.
But wait a minute. Castles had fireplaces. They had massive kitchens with huge hearths. They had chimneys. Couldn't a fire just be, you know, an accident? Dinner gone wrong.
Absolutely, and that's the caveat. Accidental fires happen all the time, so archaeologists have to be careful. They look for extensive burning in unexpected places. If you find scorch marks halfway up a defensive wall, far from any chimney,
That's not a cooking fire.
that's not a cooking fire. Or if you find pools of melted lead in the basement where there shouldn't be any, that's a sign of a catastrophic, probably deliberate fire.
Okay. Method number 2. Digging and picking. The manual labor option.
This is the brute force part of the job. It involves using iron picks and crowbars to wrench out keystones, especially the cornerstones, the coins.
Why the cornerstone?
The cornerstone is crucial. It ties 2 walls together. If you can manage to pop the cornerstone out, the structural integrity of that whole corner fails. It's like unzipping the wall.
Right.
Or you can have teams of men just picking out the facing stones, that expensive ashlar we talked about. Once that protective skin is gone, the rubble core inside is exposed to the rain and the frost. It starts to crumble much, much faster.
And the digging part.
That's for the earthworks. Using spades to level the earth ramparts, you literally dig the dirt from the bank and throw it into the ditch. You fill the ditch with the wall. It's actually quite neat in a destructive way. You use the castle to bury itself.
It's efficient. But then there's the third method, the one that sounds the most terrifying. Undermining.
This is the most dangerous but also the most effective method for bringing down a big stone tower. It's usually associated with sieges, but it is definitely used for slighting, too.
So how does it work?
You dig a tunnel, a mine, under the corner of a tower or a section of wall. As you dig, you have to prop up the tunnel with heavy wooden beams so the whole thing doesn't collapse and bury you alive.
Okay, so you're literally underneath a 1,000-ton stone tower, and the only thing holding it up is some wood.
Exactly. Then, once the mine is big enough, you fill the tunnel with combustibles. Straw, dry wood, and famously, pig fat.
We had talked about the pigs.
We have to talk about the pigs. The most famous example is from King John's siege of Rochester Castle in 1215. Now, to be clear, this was a siege, not a slighting, but the technique is identical. He couldn't break the walls, so he ordered his engineers to dig a mine under the Great Tower.
And he sent a letter.
He sent a letter to his officials demanding that they send him 40 of the fattest pigs of the sort least good for eating to be sent immediately.
Least good for eating. Even in the middle of a brutal siege, he's being frugal. Don't waste the good bacon.
It's incredible, isn't it? They used the rendered fat from those 40 pigs as a powerful accelerant. They set fire to it, it ignited the wooden props, the props burned through, the tunnel collapsed, and the entire corner of the massive stone tower came crashing down.
It's industrial. It's weaponized engineering.
And we find archaeological evidence of this being used in slighting, too. At Bungay Castle, for instance, excavations found a mine shaft dug under the keep that was likely used for slighting, not siege. The main difference is, with slighting, you can start your mine much closer to the wall because there's nobody up there shooting arrows and dropping rocks on you.
Right. You already won the battle. You have all the time in the world.
You do, but it's still incredibly risky. Collapsing a tower while you're standing next to it is never 100% safe. If those props fail early, your demolition team is buried.
So we've got the tools.
Yeah.
Fire, picks, and pig fat mines. But let's circle back to that spectrum of destruction you mentioned.
Yeah.
Because they didn't always go for the full Rochester Castle treatment, did they?
No, absolutely not. Total destruction is rare. It's just too expensive and time-consuming. Think about the labor cost. You have to pay and feed hundreds of men for weeks, maybe months, just to smash rocks. Unless you really, really hate that guy, it's just not worth the investment.
So what's the more common alternative?
Partial destruction. Doing just enough damage to humiliate the owner or disable the castle militarily. There's a brilliant example of this at Barnstaple Castle.
Barnstaple.
In 1228, an official order was given to slight the castle, but the order was very specific. It said to reduce the height of the walls to 10 feet.
10 feet, that's the height of a basketball hoop.
Pretty much. But here's the kicker. The order specifically stated that they were to leave the domestic buildings, the hall, the kitchens standing.
That is such a specific and calculated insult.
Isn't it just? The king is basically saying, you can still live here, you can have your house, your kitchen, your bedroom, but you cannot fight from here. A 10-foot wall is a garden fence, not a fortification. It's a perfect example of neutering the castle. The lord can keep his home, but he completely loses his military teeth.
It's emasculating. It transforms the castle from a symbol of martial power into just a fancy, undefendable house.
Completely. And then you have an even more minimal approach, the token slight.
The token slight.
This could be as simple as just removing the battlements from the top of the walls, or taking the doors off the gatehouse. It's a symbolic gesture. The king is saying, I could destroy this entire place if I wanted to, but for now, I'm just going to take your hat off to show you who's boss.
But castles are tough, aren't they? They're built to last. I imagine sometimes they even survive the slighting process.
They are incredibly resilient structures. Caerlaverock Castle in Scotland is basically the Terminator of castles.
The Terminator.
It was demolished or slighted multiple times in 1312, then again in 1357, then again in 1570, and so on. And yet, if you go there today, you can still see parts of the original fabric standing. It just goes to show how incredibly difficult total destruction really is. You knock it down, and a generation later, they build it back up. You knock it down again, they patch it.
And sometimes the repair itself becomes part of the story. You mentioned scars earlier.
Yes. Bothwell Castle is a fantastic example. The Great Tower, this huge circular keep, was slighted. About half of it was demolished. Later on, they repaired it. But they didn't rebuild the round tower perfectly. They just built a flat cross wall to close off the broken part.
Ah, so you can see the join.
You can see the scar. It's right there, visible in the architecture. And the masonry of the repair was of a lower quality than the original. It's a permanent reminder that says, here is where we were broken, and this is how we were patched back together.
And what about Rochester? After King John and the pigs?
Ah, Rochester. They did rebuild that corner of the tower. But the original tower was square. All four corners were square. When they rebuilt the collapsed corner, they made it round.
Why did they do that?
Well, structurally, round towers are stronger against mining and missiles. It was a military upgrade. But visually, it's jarring. You have this massive square tower with one round corner. It's a permanent architectural reminder of the damage it suffered. It says, we survived, but we are forever changed by the attack.
Like a permanent limp on the building.
Exactly. And that brings us to the next point, which is really important. A castle doesn't exist in a vacuum. It sits in a landscape. It sits next to a town.
Right, and usually the castle is the economic engine of that town. The lord lives there. He buys food from the local market. He buys cloth. He employs blacksmiths and masons. So if you slight the castle, if you destroy the engine, does the town die with it?
That was one of the big questions in Neville's thesis. Did slighting a castle kill the nearby town?
And what was the answer?
Surprisingly, for the most part, no.
Really? That is surprising.
In most cases, large established towns actually prospered even after their local castle was slighted. It turns out that once a town reaches a certain size, it develops its own momentum. It has its own markets, its own trade routes, its own local industries. The castle might have been the thing that jump-started it, but the town didn't necessarily need the castle to survive once it was established.
So the lord gets humiliated and his fortress gets wrecked, but the local butcher and the baker are doing just fine.
For the most part, yes. But there are exceptions, and they're pretty terrible exceptions. Caernarfon. In 1294, this was during the Great Welsh Revolt of Madog ap Llywelyn. Now, Caernarfon wasn't just any castle. It was Edward I's pride and joy. It was his new capital in North Wales, a massive, shining symbol of English power and dominance.
So when the Welsh rebels managed to take it,
they didn't just attack the castle, they burned the entire town to the ground. They systematically demolished the town walls. This wasn't just strategic, this was a deeply symbolic strike against the very heart of the English administration in Wales. They wanted to erase the English presence from the map entirely.
That's total war. That's not just slighting a fortress. That's wiping a whole colonial project clean.
And sometimes the king himself did the wiping. You have to look at the story of Lanfes and Beaumaris.
This is the social engineering part of it, isn't it?
It is. Edward I wanted to build his final great Welsh castle town at Beaumaris, but there was a problem. There was already a thriving, prosperous Welsh town nearby called Lanfes.
So competition.
Exactly. He couldn't have his new English-settled town of Beaumaris competing with the successful Welsh town right next door. So what did he do? He depopulated Lanfes. He forcibly moved the entire population to the other side of Anglesey. He effectively destroyed a living community to ensure that his new military creation would succeed.
That is absolutely brutal. It's destroying a community to support a fortification, not the other way around.
It is a form of landscape destruction. And speaking of landscapes, slighting wasn't just limited to masonry and towns. It often included the designed landscape.
You mean the gardens, the parks?
The gardens, the deer parks, the ornamental lakes. Kenilworth Castle is famous for its massive water defenses, which also function as a beautiful, shimmering lake, a mirror. When the castle was slighted during the Civil War, which is a bit later than our period, but the principle is identical, one of the first things they did was drain the Great Lake.
They pulled the plug.
They breached the dam and pulled the plug. Think about what that does. It turns a shimmering, beautiful, high-status feature and a key part of its defense into a giant, stinking mud pit.
It removes the beauty.
It removes the status. A designed landscape, a private park, a formal garden, a man-made lake is a huge sign of high status in the Middle Ages. It says, I have so much money and power, I can afford to use this productive land just for looking at, for my pleasure.
Right.
Destroying that landscape strips the owner of that status. It says, you are not special anymore. You are just a guy living next to a mud puddle.
It really is petty when you get down to it, isn't it? I mean, it's grand and political and strategic, but it's also deeply, deeply petty.
Well, all politics is personal in the Middle Ages.
So, okay, we've looked at the what, the how, and the where. We've seen the rubble in the ditch, the shaved moss, the drained lakes. What does this all mean for us? When we go and visit these ruins now, what should we be seeing that we weren't seeing before?
I think the single biggest takeaway is that we need to stop seeing ruins as accidental. We shouldn't look at a crumbled wall and just see damage. We need to start seeing intent.
Every missing stone is a decision somebody made.
Exactly. We should be asking questions. Was this wall pulled down by a king to punish a traitor? Was this moat shaved down to humiliate a lord? Was this castle just neutered to keep a potential rival in check? Slighting is the final chapter in a castle's biography.
The biography of a building. I like that. It's born, it lives, it fights, and then it's executed.
Or mutilated. And here's a provocative thought to leave you with, one that the thesis brings up. We can apply this destructionology to other periods, too. Think about Henry VIII and the dissolution of the monasteries.
Oh, wow. Yeah, all those ruined abbeys.
Well, we look at places like Fountains Abbey or Tintern Abbey, and we see these beautiful, romantic, peaceful ruins. But Henry VIII's commissioners used the exact same techniques as medieval castle slighters.
They did.
Absolutely. Undermining walls, setting fires, systematically stripping the valuable lead from the roofs and melting it down. It wasn't just about religious reform. It was an act of slighting on a national scale. It was using destruction to completely rewrite the power structure of the country.
He was slighting God's castles.
In a way, yes. It's the same fundamental human behavior. Using the deliberate destruction of buildings to assert authority and erase a competing power.
So the next time you're standing at a ruin, looking at a grassy mound that just looks a bit weird,
like that kidney-shaped motte at Groby.
don't just think, oh, nature took over. Think about the workmen 800 years ago, sweating with picks and shovels, deliberately carving a scar into the earth to send a message. The boss is done. His power is over.
It's a permanent scar of rebellion and retribution, and it's still there in the landscape for us to read if we just know how to look.
Well, the Deep Dive listeners, you are now all deputized destructionologists. Go forth and read the rubble. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.